and you should be good to go.
Courtney, do you think we give people a few more minutes?
Yeah, let's just give it a minute or two for folks to roll in.
That sounds good to me. Good afternoon, everyone. We're giving folks a few more minutes to jump on, but while we're waiting, if you have a moment to write in the chat box who you are and your organization, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
It's great to see you, Candace. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Courtney. Thanks for having me.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Colley-Akers, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Courtney Hayden, and we are fearlessly leading in Dr. Garcia's absence. So I hope you'll bear with us as we try to navigate today. I hope, too, you're enjoying this lovely fall day. I do have a PowerPoint to share that has our agenda, and Matt, I wonder if you might enable screen sharing on our end. Well, as I'm waiting to make sure that happens, just really quickly, the rundown of our agenda includes a spotlight on Increase the Reach and PAVE work that Ms. Candace McField will be sharing, and I'm really looking forward to that. Courtney has really talked you up, so we're excited to learn more about your work. Jamie Gable and Courtney Hayden will be providing an update on the status of vaccination. Courtney will be leading us in a discussion about as a follow-up for where we left off last month around communications. And lastly, we'll be talking a little bit about some resources for tackling misinformation and kind of preview some work that's ahead in terms of exploring misinformation. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. I will just note, I think we might be experiencing a little technical issues. Courtney, I'll hand it over to you to introduce Candace, and I'll see if I can figure out our screen sharing abilities.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the absolute best parts of my job is that this is going to sound like it's not a great thing, and it really is calling people that I don't know, or calling friends of people I know, but they don't really know me, and essentially saying to them, hey, I have some money. Do you think that you might be interested in it? And what's really interesting is when I called Miss Candace, I thought she was going to send me to other people. I was calling her because I was told she's a great community bridge. She's doing a lot of work. But this woman has so many irons in the fire. I follow her on social media. I'm always inspired to get up and go to the gym. She is a voice for fitness. She is a voice for activity and health for women in Kansas, particularly for women of color. And you may have seen her on the news because she does make some appearances. When we chatted about COVID, she came back and said, actually, I want to get in the game and I want to be involved, and I'm going to take out some funding. So with that, I will hand over to her and she can share a bit about herself and how she's using the funds. Thanks again for being here, Candace.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Courtney, for the awesome introduction. And that was so true. It's funny, when I took your call, I honestly thought I was just going to connect you to other people that I know in the community. And then as we were speaking, it kind of hit me like, wait a second, maybe this funding, I could utilize this and like have a program for myself. So thank you for reaching out for that call. So everybody, thanks for having me. I'm Candace McField. As Courtney said, I own a company called Candace McField Fitness. Basically, I'm a certified health coach. I do online coaching. So that's one aspect of my business, but I also have a company called As For Me and My Body. So I wrote a book. That's the title of the book as well, As For Me and My Body. And it really takes a holistic approach to wellness. And so when Courtney and I were speaking, I was like, oh, this might be a perfect opportunity for me to utilize the As For Me and My Body side of my business and bring in like some other coaches to help people understand like all the different links and misinformation with COVID. So before I speak about that, just I forgot other quick facts about me. So I'm a former professional figure competitor. That's kind of how I started in the industry years ago, back in like say 2006. And I competed as a professional figure competitor all the way into 2018. So I did shows here in the United States. I did a few international shows. So just kind of fell in love with the sport, and then also fell in love with helping people or transform their lives and impacting people. And so in addition to that, like Courtney said, I do a segment on Fox 4 News. I sit on the Kansas Governor's Council on Fitness, etc. So those are just some stats on me. But is the screen sharing working yet or no? Because I want it for it should be okay.
Yep.
I will share my screen. 1 second. Okay, so I think you guys can see my screen now. So as I was saying, like one side of my business is called As For Me and My Body. Like I said, it kind of started with a book that I wrote. It's a 21-day journey the reader goes through, but I also have a community. So within this community, which is like an app you can get in the Play stores, I brought in these other coaches. So the whole idea for when I talked to Courtney, I was like, oh, okay, let's bring in like nutritional health and link it to COVID and physical health and health access and equity, but also that mental health piece and work-life balance, or that career piece, and then spiritual health. And so my idea is not only to discuss that misinformation, but also like help people, how do we thrive post the crazy 2 years that we've been through? And so how do we thrive post COVID? And so, the participants are going to walk away with those, not only like understanding like the importance of like having that misinformation, like negate it, but also receive those practical tips and tricks that they can implement into their lives and take away. So as you can see on the screen, I'll make it a little bigger. So Susie Roberts, she's a registered dietitian, so she'll be discussing that nutritional health and that link between COVID. So there's 2 seminars. I forgot to say that. The first date is October 29th. And the second one is December 3rd. And I'm in the chat when I'm finished, I'll drop in this PDF so you can download it. And then also the registration link. So we would love for you to share it with your networks, or if you're interested in attending, we would love that. It's a webinar on Zoom Saturdays, starting at 10 o'clock. And so you can see, like I said, we have Susie speaking about like that link between COVID and nutrition, and then Dr. Carrie Francis, she's going to be speaking on that health access and equity. Myself, I'll be speaking on that physical health piece. And then when you get to the December 3rd webinar that we have coming up, we talk about mental health, and that's by Dr. Frederica Noble. She's a good friend of mine. She's actually based in England, so she'll be calling in from overseas or attending overseas, right? And then Michelle Ponce, she does like career and life coaching, but she'll be talking about that link between COVID and that whole work-life balance and things like that. And so then also, because As For Me, My Body has a spiritual element to it, we brought in our minister, Wes Anderson, so he'll be connecting that COVID link with that spiritual health. So that's, in a nutshell, what I wanted to just kind of quickly just give you an overview of the webinar. But if, like I said, if you guys have it, if you could share it with your networks, I would really, really appreciate that. And I'll drop that in the chat. And so that's, Courtney, that's all I really had, unless anybody has some specific questions for me.
That was amazing. Thank you. And absolutely, if anybody has questions, maybe throw them in the chat. I know we haven't gotten to see our timestamp schedule quite yet, but I encourage everyone, please share that out. Please encourage attendance. This is exactly what communities ask me for, and I never have a resource. So people tell me, I want to talk about COVID and my mental health. I want to talk about COVID and my physical health. So Candace has really stepped up and filled this gap. So share, attend, enjoy.
Yes. So thank you. Also, and I'll reach out. Here's my email address. If you need me for any questions or anything else, if you think of something later, feel free to email me anytime.
Great. Thank you so much, Candace. It was wonderful to hear about your work. Really great work. It sounds like you have. I'm going to screen share our agenda. So we are moving right on track. And we're kind of at the point to get our regular update. Again, if you do have questions for Candace, make sure you use them and explore them in the chat. But I'll hand it to our colleague, Jamie Gable from KDHE, who will provide an update. And then I think Courtney's going to follow along with some updates directly from Dr. Garcia.
Thanks. All right, so we're just going to start off, and the first thing you'll notice that's different this week is that we can see bivalent booster information on this chart. And that has replaced where it used to say just regular booster information. So we have updated to only have bivalent, one in the desire to show all of our age groups and still be able to see everything. We're just replacing it with bivalent booster, since that's kind of the most relevant information on who's protected against current strains that are in our community. And we can see that right now, the elderly population of 65 and older are having the highest coverage for bivalent booster. And right now we do not have the 5 to 11 age group with bivalent booster. When that was approved, it was essentially right before we did this data update. So we did not include that in this one, but it will be here next month. You can tell that for the most part, for one dose and completed full series, there's really not a lot of change. Even in the tender age group, it's gone up a little bit, but it is a slow uptake in that age group. If you could go on to the next slide, please. This is just getting in a little bit of information on the bivalent booster. I believe last month I had said that I thought it was going to be out of the eligible population, but we determined that the best way to look at it would actually be out of the full age group population rather than the eligible, so that you can see the percent that's really protected against the current strain rather than out of who is eligible. So you can really see that fuller picture that way. And as I stated earlier, we are not showing for 5 to 11 at this time. So we can look for that update next time. And bivalent booster information is now on the KDHE data dashboard. So you can see everything there as well. Next slide, please. So youth vaccinations, it's really quite stagnant, even with the tender age group in there. From September to October, it's really, the amount it's increased is very small across the board. And over the past 3 months, the largest increases have been in Asian and Hispanic and Latino populations. Next slide, please. So the issues that we've continued to talk about with American Indian Alaska Native vaccination calculations, those continue to exist within our data. So we are showing 3 different calculations for that, just to attempt to get a fuller picture of what the vaccination really looks like for that group. I know that that's still going to be an ongoing conversation about how to better capture that. But at this point, this is what we are able to do with what we have right now. So this is showing WebIZ, IHS, and then CDC's national coverage. And the national coverage is for all age groups, not just under 18. Next slide, please. So the 18 plus adult vaccinations, this is going up generally even less than younger age groups. And you can see that there's a negative for Asian. So generally, if something has gone negative, it's not because there's less people vaccinated, it's because a race group has been updated within their WebIZ information. So that might cause a decrease. So say they were listed as self-identified Asian previously, if they've added another race to that, then they get reclassified to multiracial. So that's the reason why something like that might show up in data occasionally. And in the 18 plus groups, the Hispanic and Latino population has the largest increase over the past 3 months. Next slide, please. And American Indian Alaska Native vaccination in adults has similar issues as the children vaccination. So we again are showing 3 different sources in an attempt to show a wider picture of what that vaccination looks like. And the conversation for how to better capture this will be ongoing. And I will be around for a little while for questions, but I am going to take off a little bit earlier than normal because I have a double book this week.
I will say that we're doing well on time, and since Jamie has to leave, does anybody have any questions for Jamie now? Okay, with that, Courtney, do you want to describe some of the updates that Dr. Jimena wanted us to include?
Sure thing. I don't know how to loud enoughly disclaimer that I am not a medical doctor. I think everybody on the call knows that. And so this is really an update to you via Dr. Jimena, who wasn't able to join us today. I would encourage you, if you have questions or feedback, throw them in the chat. If there is a way that Vicki and I can answer, we will. And if it's a question that really needs to go back to Dr. Jimena, we will catalog those answers, include your email if you want an emailed response. And if you don't include your email, we'll just go ahead and answer them at the next section. So the bivalent booster is available now for everyone aged 5 and older. And we just saw in that data that those numbers are quite low. So just a little call to action. I won't make anyone raise hands, but I'm sure that there are many of us who just need to get to scheduling that and finding the time to get it. And we would encourage you to do so if that's your choice. This booster has specific protection that includes the Omicron variant, which is new and predominant in the US. My favorite quote is from Maggie Thompson of this group, who just says, "Get the shot 3 times over," with far more charisma than I can muster. Everyone who has gotten 2 COVID vaccines, if you've gotten those 2 vaccines and 2 months have passed, you're now eligible. I'm pretty happy with that definition. It's one of the simpler ones that we've seen come out. The next sort of call to action here that we really chatted about Paxlovid last time. And so this is a reminder to ask your provider about Paxlovid if you develop COVID symptoms. If you develop COVID and have any symptoms, you must begin that medication within 5 days of developing symptoms. And for those who are immunocompromised, a reminder that you can ask for Evusheld, which is that long-acting antibody that provides protection from COVID for up to 6 months. So just a little voiceover. I will check the chat to see if there are questions.
Again, we're doing well on time. Does anybody have any questions for either Jamie or Courtney?
Hey, this is Candace. Are these slides available to us?
Yes, we'd be happy to distribute them after the meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Are there concerns about the low uptake, especially in relation to flu?
My personal opinion, again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Dr. Jimena, is that, from a public health perspective, we'd like to see the numbers higher. We know that this is our primary form of providing protection. And as a person, right, putting on my personal experience cap, I think we're just dealing with a bit of fatigue. We're multiple shots in, we're just at that point where sort of doubling down to say this is still important. This is still what is preventing severe illness. This is still what's keeping you out of the hospital. So we're hopeful the numbers will come up.
Well, again, the opportunity to add comments in the chat box is always available, so please feel free to do so. We'll move on. I'm going to stay with Courtney, who's going to provide a follow-up communication from last month's meeting.
Oh my goodness. If I don't lose my voice now, I'm kidding. We'll get a good update here. So what this is at our last session, for those of you who were here, we did a wonderful deep dive into Paxlovid, which is that antiviral treatment if you develop symptoms of COVID-19. That conversation came to be because members of the community reached out to us, and particularly some of the folks in the Wichita Black Nurses Association, and said, hey, I think people are really struggling to not only get this medication if they need it, but to have access to the right information. So at the last session, we shared that info, and then we jumped into our work groups that we're all members of and really started to deep dive. From that, there's been some exciting action. So we can go to the first slide. This is the first thing that I want to do is just highlight how incredibly unique and productive each and every work group conversation was. So these are word clouds, just for a bit of a high level impression. Really, each of the groups talked about different things. There are, of course, some common themes, right? We want access, we want to advance knowledge, we want to fight hesitancy and misinformation. But the way that played out within each of the work groups was fairly unique, which isn't surprising, but is very interesting to see. Specifically, when we look at this, 2 of the work groups stood out as matching up with what we thought might work. So when the community first reached out and said, we think this is a concern, Dr. Jimena and I said, okay, maybe we need to create a brochure. Maybe we need a paper tool that's in the right languages, that's accessible, that's community driven and created. And for the Hispanic and Latino Latinx affairs community and the Black and African American affairs work group, the brochure resonated. We did have some current concerns about systemic change and how folks will be able to advocate for themselves, but the brochure seemed viable. For the disability concerns section and the Indigenous affairs work group, we're not so sure that we actually narrowed in on the brochure. So what we did is we started with the African American Affairs group because we had a built-in focus group. So now you're going to start to hear me use 2 terms. So work group is our COVID group, and focus group is a small group of people who got together outside of COVID and continue to deep dive on this. This is sort of the brainchild of the Indigenous Affairs group, because we have a focus group for reviewing the data and how to best display the data. So we used that framework that was set forward by the Indigenous group And we went to the focus group we had built in with the Black and African American group. I'm going to say right now, you're hearing this and you're getting excited because you want to be involved and you want to take on a bit of a leadership group, or you'd like to be in a focus group, or hey, you're in the disability concerns or the Indigenous affairs group and you want to start at the beginning and give some feedback and your unique form of leadership, reach out to me. You can put it in the chat, just say, Courtney, reach out. And or maybe Miss Vicky can throw my email back into the chat so that if you're uncomfortable putting it in a public forum, you can reach out to me one-on-one. So from here, I'm going to deep dive into some timelines. They're very detailed. I want you to know everything we've done to try to make sure that this is an accurate reflection of what happened in our work group. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the first of 2 slides of timelines for the Black and African American Affairs work group. So back in September, thank you so much, Martha. Back in September, we had the COVID meeting, we had those discussions, we realized, okay, the brochure could be good. We went from there into our focus group. They really sat down with the notes from the work group, and I've got probably 6 pages of notes. Put together a draft. Dr. Jimena then went and met with the Paxlovid folks to see what kind of current educational material existed. And we sort of decided there's great educational material available, but we were going to move forward with a community-driven framework and just make sure it was in line and accurate with the emergency use authorization. So from there, Dr. Garcia then met with the KDHE Public Information Communications Director and the Performance Improvement Director, and we wanted to start to look at potential funding. So it's not only about creating this brochure, but it's about making sure we can get it out and get it into the right hands. That was also a resounding theme in many of the work groups, is that how we distribute it matters as much as the content which is in it. Then Dr. Garcia reviewed that first draft and our direction with Ms. Stacy, the Executive Director of the African American Affairs Commission. Again, we reviewed that content, and based on all of that review, we created a second draft. So all community-driven language. That second draft was shared with Dr. Joan, who I believe is on the line. Thank you, Dr. Joan. And she is the state health officer. Her feedback was recorded and provided to the group. Keep going. We're almost through, you guys. It's a roller coaster, but bear with me. So then the focus group had a chance to feedback on what from the clinicians, what from the physicians was included. And all of that information was bundled and sent to the CML collective. And you will catch me saying CMLC because that is what we tend to say in the office. So CMLC stands for CML collective. You may be wondering, Courtney, if you already worked on 2 drafts and met a bunch of times, what do you mean you're just getting a draft from CMLC? So I am not a graphic designer. So those early drafts were really about getting the language to reflect what the focus and work group wanted. That's what was sent to the CML collective. And they are currently working on a proper first draft based on all of that upfront work and community feedback. They were actually out of the office last week. And so we are aware that they are currently working on drafting. I'm updating you today. And please know that we will continue to update. I'm going to try to push forward so that if there's time for questions at the end, we'll know. But on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about where we are with the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx Affairs work group. So we're not quite as far, again, because we started with the African American group just on the premise of they raised it up. And so they were primed and ready for action. So same concept. Back in September, we had our COVID work group meeting, had some discussions. Discussions seemed to indicate that this would be viable. We formed a focus group. I will disclaimer right now that Dr. Jimena took lead on this. She's a community member. She reached out to a couple of people. If you're in that group and you want to volunteer that you're there, you can, but I'm not going to call your names. I don't like that feeling when the teacher says your name and your hand's not up. So that group has met 3 times in total. just to review content pre-first draft, not my decision, absolutely at the desire of that particular focus group. And then we've also had some one-on-one meetings to draft personal statements. And this just show how tailored our two approaches are, because in this particular work group, we were really focused on some storytelling and wanting more of it to be quote driven. And then today I'm giving you this update. So Vicki, I'm going to defer on how long I chatted versus how much time I had. And, any thoughts, feedback, question is welcome.
We have plenty of time, Courtney. So any questions from the group, or if you've been a part of the focus groups and want to add or describe your experience, that would be great as well.
The only exciting aside that I have for everybody is that just today, I did start to put pen to paper to make that first unofficial draft for the Hispanic work group. So I think that we'll start to see some progress, and from here on out, it will follow the same methodology more than likely, that it'll end up going through a couple of draft revisions. It'll go through those clinicians, the physicians, and then it will go to the CML collective.
Last call for any questions or comments. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up by kind of previewing that next month's COVID meeting might be a little bit different. We are still making final arrangements, but want to just note that there are some plans in the work to make next month a little bit different for our usual COVID meeting. And in part, that could be because we will be learning about some resources and opportunities around tackling misinformation. So we wanted to kind of tee that conversation up by discussing misinformation or disinformation today. We have a few resources we wanted to make sure that we shared with you all. So I'll go through those, but also are interested in expanding sort of the repository of available resources at all of our disposal regarding misinformation or disinformation. So I'm going to talk just about a few resources that really stand out from our perspective. The first is the Public Health Communications Collaborative has a series of alerts about misinformation and put really great information into your hands about what to do about it. There's also the same group produces a misinformation toolkit, and then the Surgeon General's report and related website has a lot of good stuff. So I'm going to just really unpack those very briefly. So here you see some screenshots, and hopefully they aren't too pixelated for you, regarding the Public Health Communications Collaborative misinformation alerts. Essentially, they review and curate misinformation that is available or that people are hearing about. They create an alert for each kind of misinformation that's out in the world, and then also sort of provide some information about how seriously we should take that misinformation, sort of suggesting that there are some things that, yes, that's misinformation. However, the juice might not be worth the squeeze in trying to devote energy to refuting that. So they describe that as a low risk alert, all the way to something that's a high risk alert that really, is considerable misinformation, and that effort really should be directed at reducing that. So you can see here two kinds of misinformation that they have distilled or heard about, and the sort of the distillation of the information, and then what level of risk this kind of misinformation includes. If you click, you can learn more about each topic, and they also have some guidance for how to address that kind of misinformation. So a really hands-on tool for misinformation. The same group, the Public Health Communications Collaborative, also produces a really comprehensive misinformation toolkit. And I wanted to share just a few of the things that stood out to me about that toolkit. And again, the link, it was on the first slide. They do a great job of defining some of the terms. So trying to separate out what is misinformation versus disinformation. And then they also have a number of really good tools built around their framework for how do you address misinformation, really starting with learning and preparation, engaging in listening and understanding, and then finally doing some work around engagement to effectively reduce that misinformation. And the last tool that we wanted to describe before we get a little bit from you all about the tools that you find to be helpful is the Surgeon General's report. The whole website has a number of resources, and I picked two of my favorites, so I hope that's okay. The first is, as you scroll down on the website, they have a really great way to talk about action. So what are based on your role in the community, whether that's an individual, whether you're a health educator or health professional, what is the role that you have in addressing misinformation? And I think that there are suggestions, again, that looks like it might be a little bit pixelated, but are really good and concrete for what we can do depending on our roles. In addition, the website overall curates a number of resources from many different sources that you can use and explore at your leisure. So these are three resources that we wanted to raise up and make sure everybody was aware of. And we're interested in better understanding what resources you use and what has worked well for you in the work that I think we all have had in front of us around countering misinformation. What are your thoughts?
Giovanni, did you want to voice over what you shared in the chat?
Yes, Courtney, I am driving and so I do want to apologize if I have some dead spots here with the connection on my phone. But I did wanted to quickly share that we are in flu season and we have been approached by many employers to go by and do the influenza vaccine for their employees as a service to them. And we usually offer the new bivalent COVID booster shot, but many of the employers had voiced that, it has been their experience in the past that when employees receive both shots at the same time that they get sicker. And so that has been really kind of what the employers have been voicing and kind of the concern right now, because they feel like with just the flu shot that somehow they're protected now. And so that is kind of something that we've kind of experienced here in the past, few weeks that we've been doing the flu shots.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni, for sharing that. That's really helpful to know. It's kind of its own sort of round of rumor slash misinformation, and that might be something we can explore if there are resources that are specifically responsive to. So thank you for elevating that.
Thanks, Giovanni. And I'll say it reminds me so much of what do we call it? Prehistoric COVID. Those earliest moments in COVID where we were trying to figure out if we could even co-administer. And so this feels to me like it's sort of the next variation of that versus maybe there are some articles or some resources that will sort of double down on that. So we will look into it. And Mr. Ian, I want everybody to know I'm not just calling, I am messaging first, asking if it's okay. So Mr. Ian, if you would share a little bit, you really are the communications guru. You've been with us before and shared about it. So we'd love to hear more about the situation with the community health workers.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. You don't have to call me the guru. I just read a lot. So some of the work that we did at CCPH, which is really a collegiate community-based organization, we really leaned heavily on our community health workers to be the trusted voices in those communities to, disperse those myths. And the reason why was simple is because it was trust. The biggest key to communication when you're trying to work in terms of convincing someone to do something or take an action is trust. If they trust you, they'll do it. And so really leveraging those community workers was really helpful. So we actually took a tactic that we used here at KUMC, and we had community health workers take their stories and share them with the community, not only through video, but also in person as they were out talking to them, to really encourage people to not only get tested, but vaccinated and promote other health initiatives. And the real key to that, once again, was they trusted them. There was no research needed on their end. It was easy for them. They knew who they were, and it just made things a lot easier. So I don't know how applicable that is to everyone, but if you have access to CHWs or other trusted members in your community, really leverage them to your advantage.
Thank you, Ian. That's a great reminder. If there's a specific resource that or a link to something like that, Ian, I'll loop back with you to see if I can get my hands on it for the COVID group. Thank you. Any?
Yes, can I add something very quickly? I absolutely love what Ian just mentioned regarding community health workers and utilizing people within the community. Very interesting story. We also partner with a pastor from a church to do some COVID testing and COVID vaccines. And it was remarkable, you know, how people received us and the support that we had from members of that church. Very different from, you know, some of the other groups. And so, yes, reaching out to those trusted people within the community, and that might be the CHWs, but that can also mean, you know, maybe that employer or that church leader or that school principal that, you know, might be open and willing to support our efforts.
Really great reminder. Thank you, Giovanni. That was a really important reminder that the people that community members already trust come in many different forms, and that it's important that we're in touch with that and connecting those as available resources. I'll also just point that John mentioned a few different resources that he has noted might be helpful. So an episode of This American Life that was available this week is one that he might recommend. And then the book, The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for Hearts, Minds, and Democracy might be a good resource for people to check out. Any other resources that anybody's already using or taking advantage of?
Yeah, I'd like to just make one comment on This American Life. I think what was most gut-wrenching to me was the fact that this young woman believed that her brother was telling her the truth about what was going on with his illness. She believed that what he said about her father was also true. And she found out that he was receiving disinformation and misinformation from a cousin, the brother was, that was totally devastating. The dad died and the brother died, both based on lies that he had been told and that he was telling her. And I found it kind of stupefying that he told her he was doing what she suggested that he should do to make sure that he didn't put himself at additional risk for the illness. And at the same time was hearing from his cousin, who was his homie, who was helping him get through this. And the most disturbing part of it was that this belief that those of us who are vaccinated shed the virus, we don't get it, but we shed it. And that they get it and die, the non-vaccinated get it and die because we're giving it to them. And there was, and probably the most difficult part of emotionally for me was, this is my family. I have family members who believe this crap. And my wife has family members who believe this crap. And the lies that were going on didn't allow this woman to push harder. And I don't know that it would have mattered. I don't know that it would have mattered that she did. Anyway, I really commend it to everybody. There's a second part that I believe is next Sunday. So there's a part 2, but the writer who did it basically does kind of ethnographic research. She embeds herself in an experience And then she tells the story through the messaging and through the language of the person who's experiencing it. And this woman became enraged with what she found out only after he died. And her father was dead as well. So I think it's kind of incumbent upon us to figure out ways for us to, I think Ian's point about trust and finding trusted people is essential. The kid who died had a trusted friend who was in the camp of the people who believed, that remdesivir didn't work and that ivermectin was the only solution, and that, all that kind of stuff. And it's, I think it really makes me think about what messaging and what way do I have to gain trust of people when they know what camp I'm in. I'm, and it's more about, tell me why you're thinking that, and getting them to share more, I guess, about, that's what The Persuaders is about, the book that I put on there. It just kind of sent me reeling, and I'm still trying to figure out what we can do, those of us who know what ought to happen, which is kind of bugging me with why we're at 4% in the Kansas City area on the COVID booster. And BQ 1.1's coming. And I don't know. It just makes me think about, we can't give up, but we've got this kind of scary thing out there right now. It's really kind of scary. Anyway, I probably should shut up because I don't have a solution here. I just bring it up a concern, but it is something I think everybody could really benefit from listening to that show. It just was really frightening to me.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you for sharing that. And I think sort of what you evoke for me is a really good reminder that it's easy to talk about academically, and it's at the core about people and people who are loved and a part of our families. So I think that's a really important reminder. Any other comments or thoughts about this?
I hesitate to talk more. I see Troy just put something in the chat. So again, I'm putting on my, I'm a member of this community hat, not a facilitator hat. One of the things that I do based on what John just said is I look a lot at the information that I'm receiving and why it looks the way it does. And, what the lens is that I'm seeing things, like through my algorithm, through social media. And in terms of that personal education, there's always the education about trying to reach others, but I think if I can understand more the existing mechanisms by which people get information, it feeds my empathy, because we are not in the first days of this, and it can be really hard. So I'm a geriatric millennial, and I love YouTube. And there's a really common, they're partnered with PBS, they're called Crash Course. I will put a link in the chat. There's something called Crash Course Digital Literacy, and it's a 10 or an 11-part series that talks about how people get their information, how to judge if information is accurate or not. And so many of my partners who are working with me who have sort of transferred into public health. So public health wasn't their bread and butter, but now they realize they have relationships and skills. And often this is the folks taking out pay grants, as you've seen from our highlights. And this is a series that I recommend that they consider taking if it's of interest. So I will throw it in the chat. And with that, I will leave with Troy has something in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. I think that would be great if you would share that. And Troy noted in the chat that the CDC has a great how to have hard discussions about COVID guide. All right, with that in mind, I tried to take notes about the many things that we've discussed, and we will try to curate those and put them together when we send out the meeting notes as well as the slide deck. As I mentioned, this is previewing that we plan to continue a conversation, hopefully about misinformation into the November discussion, and we'll Just note that you should probably plan to be on the lookout for information that suggests that the November COVID meeting will be a little bit different, and we will try to get that out as early as we can make that available. Courtney, do you want to add anything before we wrap up?
Vicky, you are so good. Yes, I would just say that we're gonna make it sound like exciting and a mystery. And if we're lucky, there will be a present in your inbox that will be something potentially exciting in November. So I will caveat that with, I know we've had invite challenges in the past. Thank you for the reaction, Christina, trying to hype us up here. So if it's a week out and you're thinking I haven't seen anything or what's going on, please reach out to me. Like I will help you. I will make sure that you get, that you're sorted with technology. Thanks.
All right, I think with that, we'll probably give you 10 minutes of your day back. I think this might be a first for COVID. So thank you for your time today. Enjoy the lovely weather, and we'll look forward to getting more information out to you as we move forward.